Welcome in, everybody. This is your self-care staffing for Monday, May 4th, 2020. I am Lou Pascal. I'm the school social worker in the Manchester City Schools in Manchester, Tennessee. Those of you who have been watching these videos from the beginning know that I made a commitment to make a video about self-care every school day during the building closures due to COVID-19. So in my school system, that began in mid-March, and I started making videos a couple of days into that first week that we were closed. And as things progressed, we got the word that our district was going to remain closed for the duration of the school year. My commitment to making the videos remain the same. I've been posting videos every school day throughout this experience. Just wanted to update you a little bit about what I'm thinking as the school year nears the close, nears the end. I'm just giving some thought to how to land the plane. So right now I have plans for videos for the next 3 weeks. So I have a plan to post a video every school day through May 22nd. So just to kind of let you know what I'm thinking in terms of this project. So this week I want to talk a little bit more about feelings. So we're going to get a little bit touchy-feely up in these videos this week. Today I want to talk about guilt versus shame. And I'm not normally one to give a definition for every concept that I introduce on these videos, but I thought it would be helpful today because we're differentiating between two things. And so I got the definition of guilt from dictionary.com, and it says guilt is a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some offense, crime, wrong, whether real or imagined. Michael McKee, who is the vice chairman of the Cleveland Clinic Psychiatry and Psychology Department, said that guilt can be associated with the following in an article on WebMD: headaches, backaches, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal symptoms. So guilt can be associated with all of those physical occurrences in your body. The definition for shame I found in the Oxford English Dictionary, and they define shame as a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. So still sort of linked to certain incidences, choices that we might have made, but one is a feeling of responsibility or remorse, and the other one is a feeling of humiliation or distress. So sort of different intensities of feelings. An article on Psych Central said that toxic shame can stimulate the sympathetic nervous system and trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response. We've talked a lot about the fight, flight, freeze response in these videos. We've touched on that many times. Just to give you a little bit of my thoughts on guilt and shame, one way that I distinguish guilt from shame in my own life is whether or not I'm experiencing a shame attack. And I'll just try to describe a little bit for you what a shame attack is. A shame attack for me is almost an out-of-body experience. When I'm thinking about old stuff that causes me shame, I can sometimes blush, be totally out of the moment. There are things going on around me, people talking, and I'm just locked into a particular train of thought about something that occurred years ago, probably, that has shame feelings attached to it for me. And so until I break out of that train of thought, I'm just really not present, basically. So that's kind of how shame attack feels in my life. Another difference between guilt and shame, this is just kind of to think about whether you're feeling guilt or shame. Here's a question. Can you do anything about it? Is there anything you can do to make amends? Anything you can do to alter what occurred? If there is some sort of behavior change you can make, or if there's some sort of amends you can make for what happened in the past, or behavior change you can make going forward, then I would suggest for your consideration that you are likely dealing with guilt. If you can do some sort of action to impact what occurred in the past or behavior change for the future, then I would think that that is more likely a guilt feeling. Some guilt is definitely unearned. Some of us have a constant inner critical voice that encourages us to feel guilt and responsibility for things that don't belong to us. So, I don't know how to describe. There are lots of people to which that can apply, that you have this inner critical voice, that you feel guilt and responsibility for everything. There are a lot of people that just kind of have that makeup that they feel responsible for the world. And when they feel responsible to fix things, when they can't fix things, it's their fault. Even if they really didn't contribute to the situation, they can find a way for it to become their fault. So let's do some self-care check-in questions. Going on the premise that guilt and shame are universal emotions, that we all feel guilt and shame from time to time. What is an example of something that makes you feel guilt or shame, or both? What action could you take to address the guilt portion? What self-talk could you use to combat the shame portion? So, I always try to answer these questions. And so I tried to think of something that might cause me guilt and shame that I would be willing to talk about on a video. And so one of the examples that I thought of was years and years and years ago. I don't know if I was definitely in school. I don't know if it was elementary school, maybe a little bit later, I'm not sure. But I was in a spelling bee. I think I had won, maybe I didn't win the spelling bee at my original school, but maybe I had come in like top 3 or something in the spelling bee. So I went on to the next level. I think it was like the county-wide spelling bee that I was going to compete in. And I got eliminated really early on. And I got eliminated for misspelling a relatively simple word. So I think when thinking about that, I had guilt and shame both about that incident. I had guilt, number one, because I had worn this jacket. I don't know if it was a denim jacket or whatever, but I had worn this jacket and I had gotten up from my chair to go spell my word. Didn't take my jacket with me because I thought I'd be coming back to sit down in the chair. Did not, because I got eliminated. So I didn't think in that moment, because I was embarrassed because I had misspelled the word, I didn't think in that moment to go back to the chair and get my jacket. And so I don't know if we would have stayed the whole time, even if I would have gotten my jacket. But in my child mind, not only had I gotten eliminated from the spelling bee, I also left my jacket, and so we had to stay for the duration of the spelling bee when we might otherwise have left. I'm not even sure if that's a real thing, but that was the narrative in my mind. I had guilt that I should have gone and gotten my jacket, and that other people were impacted because of my mistake. I had shame, again, because it was a relatively easy word. So that's just an example of something that has caused me guilt and shame, or something that I have reacted to with guilt and shame over the years. So, what can I do about that? Well, practically, I was a good speller at the time, but I have continued to improve my spelling abilities. Have I ever been in a spelling bee since then? No, I have not. But having good spelling has served me well throughout my life. So that's what I could have done practically about it. My self-talk, well, let me go back to practical skills also. I think at the time I probably didn't have extremely good skills at dealing with nervousness, and I was nervous. I'm not one who can just be totally calm when I'm having to do some sort of performance in front of people, whether it's a speech or spelling bee, whatever. I can get through it, and I think that my skills are improved and refined enough at this point that I keep it under control, and it's not even really that noticeable if I am nervous. But that's another practical thing that I did as a result of that incident, was got better at spelling, developed better skills to cope with nervousness. So let's go on to self-talk. What self-talk could I implement to deal with the emotions from that spelling bee? One thing that I wrote down is that I could remind myself that I had done well enough in the first place to go to the next level. So obviously I wasn't completely without spelling ability, because I had gotten to this next level of competition in the first place. And just a reminder that I was probably nervous. I was a child. My skills at dealing with that were not completely refined at that point. So that's some self-talk that I can say to myself to kind of soften some of those emotions around that situation. Some of you have been carrying guilt and shame with you for years, and it has impeded your ability to implement self-care in your life. So I want you to think about the self-care check-in questions. I want you to think about if you have guilt and if you have shame, or the guilt and the shame that most people have in their lives. Can you pinpoint what impact it has had on your self-care? Has it made you feel less worthy of self-care? Has it prompted you to be really hard on yourself and work yourself really hard all the time to make up for whatever that was that occurred? There are a lot of ways that guilt and shame can influence your thinking about self-care. So here's a quote. It's somewhat lengthy. The quote is, "It's time to let go of anything you've believed that leaves you feeling shameful, incompetent, confused, or helpless. Studies show that spontaneously repeating your new positive statements," so she's talking about affirmations, "and doing so often can change your attitude and thus change your behavior. It takes some effort to get your neurons firing in a different pattern, but it is possible. There is no hardwiring. It is all malleable." So she's talking about affirmations, self-talk, and then at the end there, she's talking about neuroplasticity, which we've also touched on during this series. So I'm going to read that one more time and sort of try to comment on it a little bit. It's time to let go of anything you've believed that leaves you feeling shameful, incompetent, confused, or helpless. Studies show that spontaneously repeating your new positive statements. So going back to the self-care check-in question, what kind of self-talk can you devise around guilt and shame that can sort of rewrite that story for you. So, affirmations, self talk. Studies show that spontaneously repeating your new positive statements and doing so often can change your attitude and thus change your behavior. It takes some effort to get your neurons firing in a different pattern, but it is possible. There is no hardwiring, it's all malleable. So that was Amanda Steinberg, and she wrote a book called Worth It: Your Life, Your Money, and Your Terms. Worth It: Your Life, Your Money, Your Terms. So it's mostly a financial book, but it has a lot of things about mindset, financial mindset, and that quote came from that book. Another quote, and the video that I'm going to leave with you today is going to elaborate on this, but many of you know Brene Brown. She's a social worker and a researcher. She had a TED Talk that had millions and millions of views, and she researches shame, vulnerability, some of those concepts. And so here is what she says about guilt and shame. Guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is, I am bad. So guilt is sort of around a certain action, behavior. Shame is a general overall statement that I am bad. I am wrong. I am not correct. I am dysfunctional. Any of those words. Guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is, I am bad. So those of you who are in education, are school people, you have heard this many, many times as a strategy for how to communicate with students. A student makes a bad choice, they are not a bad child. They are not a bad boy. They are not a bad girl. You might have done something that disappointed me. That action disappointed me, but you are not a disappointment. Okay? So think about that in terms of how you might deal with students. And if that's a strategy that you're using with them, think about how you could repurpose that for your life. So think about your self-talk and what you're saying to yourself on a daily basis. Is it, that was a bad choice I made? Or is it, I'm bad all the time, all day, every day, I'm bad. Everything I do is bad, I'm bad. So think about that. So I don't have a song for you today. I'm sure there are songs about guilt and shame, but I try to give you songs that I really like, and I couldn't think of any song that I really liked that had a lot to do with guilt and shame. So I'm going to give you sort of a prompt instead. The prompt is, if there is a song or other piece of media that prompts you to feel guilt or shame, then I would suggest that you drastically limit your exposure to that whatever song, story, TV show, movie, whatever it is that elicits guilt and shame. Assuming that you have identified whatever you could have done about that particular incident and followed through on that, then yes, guilt and shame are universal emotions, but do you need to continue to rehash that for the rest of your life? And if this song, I'm just going to say song, but anything that you could consume as media, if that song elicits guilt and shame for you, then again, I would suggest that you drastically reduce your exposure to it, perhaps just eliminate it from your life. The big reason is to not trigger yourself. If that song always takes you back to that incident or that situation, you're triggering yourself every time you listen to it, especially if there's not anything in this world that you can do about it. Then what is that trigger, and what is that shame attack? What is the usefulness of that? What is the purpose of that? Again, don't let it be the basis of a shame attack for you. So the video that I want to leave with you today is going to be Brene Brown, and it's a short, I think it was 60 minutes. It was some supplement to 60 minutes. And the title is called Focus on Guilt Instead of on Shame. And so it's a good video, and it's a real general kind of elaboration of guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. So I'm going to put that in the comments when I post this, and that is going to be our video that I'm going to leave with you today. So if all hearts and minds are clear, I appreciate y'all watching this video and spending this time with me, and I will see you back here for another staffing tomorrow.